Hello and welcome to Charch Chat. I am Paul Charchian from LeagueSafe.com. Thanks for joining us here at Open Sports. Today we're going to review some of the most salient fantasy notes from Sunday, from Week 8's action, and we begin with something that happened actually before kickoff of Week 8. Darren McFadden was made inactive because of his turf toe, and you know what? I hate to just keep beating a dead horse here, but I've been saying this for over a month now. Darren McFadden doesn't belong on a roster. That's just the way it is. And you know what? Even when he was playing, he wasn't producing fantasy relevant stats. He's in a three-man rotation there. We don't know who the goal line back is because they rarely get the ball at the goal line. And you know, it's just a bad situation for all of the runners there. And even with McFadden out, we weren't able to see Justin Fargas do a lot, which is bad news for Justin Fargas owners, although it was against Baltimore. And Michael Bush, another guy that does not deserve a spot on a roster. You know, coming into the season, I felt that there was a good chance he would be the goal line back. Well, his team never gets to the goal line, so what difference does it make? Next, Ted Ginn, 175 yards. A Dolphin receiver, 175 yards. His very first catch of the game, long play, 64 receptions, 64 yards, his longest reception of his career, as a matter of fact. You know, Miami's schedule is very easy going forward, and I think Ted Ginn, you know, there's always a temptation to, you know, react and just go pick up whoever had a big game last week, and then more often than not you get disappointed. But because the schedule's so easy, I've got them with just one particularly tough defense the rest of the year, and it's Buffalo. So, you know, obviously they can do a little something against Buffalo. So that's Week 14. The rest of the schedule's so easy for Miami. I think you want to go ahead and hang on there. You know, and just with Ted Ginn, it's going to be a little up and down. He's just two games removed from a one-catch, -1 yard performance. But by and large, I'm a believer that the Miami offense is generally headed in the right direction. It doesn't all go through Ronnie Brown. Chad Pennington can still make some plays, and we're seeing Ted Ginn start to evolve a little bit. Next, Nate Washington. You know, Santonio Holmes likely suspended for a good chunk of the rest of the year, and maybe the rest of the year. Nate Washington's going to get long reps. You know, he doesn't have the full skill set that Santonio Holmes does, but he's a good long-range deep threat. And you know, I worry about the Pittsburgh offensive line giving Ben Roethlisberger enough time to connect downfield and for longer plays to actually develop. But he'll get his shots, and you know, as he's proven, he's put up 49, 50, and 64-yard touchdowns in 3 weeks. I mean, that's awesome. And there are a lot of leagues that give a lot of bonuses for long touchdowns. So Nate Washington's a guy that can make some sense, and was happy to see him perform well against a pretty good Giants secondary. Next, Marcus Colston, a second disappointing outing for him, and this in a game where it was a shootout. I mean, tons of points, and the Saints generated tons of points, but Colston, he was 2 for 65, and 56, and he did, at one point, he had a ball batted away that was headed for him in the end zone, and it was batted away at the last minute, and that might very well have been a touchdown for him. But, you know, otherwise, I'm getting this increasing feeling that he's just going to be one of myriad guys in that offense. And, you know, they're going to be playing Henderson and Lance Moore and David Patton, and I don't know, a little bit like they use their tight ends right now. They're using 3 different guys in at tight end all the time, and so I'm a little bit worried. As much as we like Colston, and as much as I feel that he's the best receiver they've got, I'm worried about this wide receiver by committee approach that Sean Payton is taking in New Orleans. Next, LaRon McClain was one of the great stories of the first half of the season, but the last few weeks I've gotten to be pretty worried about him. The numbers for his carries are going down. Now, I wouldn't care that much if he was getting quality carries near the stripe like he did earlier in the season. But he's not getting the ball at the stripe. We've seen Willis McGahee get a couple of cracks at it, and he scored once. I'm really worried about LaRon McClain, and I would understand if you felt the need to drop him because his value was really as a goal line guy. If he's not going to get used there, then what's the value that he brings to your team? Matt Schaub, the hottest quarterback going. For the last month, he has been on fire. Now, he's also had the luxury playing a lot of home games against pretty bad opponents, but he's been remarkably good. We're going to find out a lot more about how real he is over the next month. 3 of his next 4 games are on the road and against pretty good opponents. Let me tell you who they are. They're at Minnesota, then they play Baltimore back at home. Then they're at Indy and at Cleveland, and Cleveland is a pretty good defense, despite what we tend to think about Cleveland. They're not half bad, and especially against the pass. So We're going to find out a lot more about Schaub, but for the time being, you can't dare bench Matt Schaub. He's just too hot, and that includes this coming game against Minnesota in Minnesota. Minnesota's secondary is better than it has been, but still not a shutdown unit. Next, Tom Coughlin. Tons of respect for his decisions to take a hard line with Plaxico Burress. More teams need to be willing to do this with their superstar players, but they're killing fantasy owners. That's the bad news. I mean, we didn't know what his role was going to be going into this game. Was he going to be suspended? Was he going to be active? Was he going to be suspended for part of the game? What was his role in the game plan? You just no way of knowing. And, I got to believe that come next week he'll be back to his usual role. But it's been a tough couple of weeks for fantasy owners with the suspensions, and this week where he he didn't play for the first part of the game and then did very little after that. Curious how the Seahawks blew out the 49ers and never was able to run the ball. I'm just those running backs just aren't getting it done, and that offensive line is not built for run blocking, and I think that's a continuing problem in Seattle. Don't trust Julius Jones or Maurice Morris at all. Interesting to see in the London game how New Orleans decided to deal with the absence of Reggie Bush. It was almost entirely Deuce McAllister's game, and you think that it's because. I believe it's because this game was set up perfectly for him. He's a plodding running back at this stage of his career. Early on, he was an electrifying back who was capable of a lot of long runs. That's not who he is anymore. After the knee surgeries, he's now a straight ahead, more of a power back. Well, when you're playing in deep grass on a wet field, that's perfect. So of course he got a lot of use. If you were one of the people who went out there and scrambled and you picked up Pierre Thomas or Aaron Stecker, don't panic yet. Let's find out what the Saints do back when they are playing at home on a fast track. And Deuce McAllister seems a lot slower there than he does when the field service is neutralizing everybody. So don't panic on those guys yet, and don't overreact on Deuce McAllister. He's not going to be as safe a start in future games as he was in this one. Anquan Boldin's back and looked phenomenal. So he's back. And before going in moments before the game, there were a lot of reports that he was going to be on the field for about 30 plays. It looked to me like he was on the field for about 3/4 of them, and he looked very good. Now, one thing we should know: Steve Breston still caught 9 passes and actually had more catches and more yards than Boldin did. Although Boldin had the touchdowns, Breston's going to be a guy who's going to be a factor for the rest of the year, and he's going to get a lot of looks out of the slot. And they love this kid, and they should. And they have a wealth of riches there in Arizona, and they may also want to continue to test Breston, and in case Boldin ends up leaving in the offseason, which is a very real possibility with his contract situation. So we'll see what happens here with Breston, but I continue to like Breston going forward as a spot duty guy, and as a great insurance policy for both Larry Fitzgerald and Anquan Boldin. But nonetheless, great to see Boldin back, and you can continue to start him the rest of the year with a great deal of confidence. All right, next, Donnie Avery. Still available in most leagues, although picked up in a fair number this past week. Those of you that have been watching this have heard me talk about him for about 3 weeks now. A big game, 163 yards and a touchdown, 55 yards and a touchdown last week. Torrey Holt's a complete afterthought. I mean, really, it looks like he's emerged as the go-to receiver in very quick order for the Rams. And I'm sure Torrey Holt will still have some good games sprinkled in here or there, but right now, Donnie Avery, clearly the guy to have. From that wide receiver group, and as the Rams continue to play better ball, he becomes more and more viable. Obviously, he's not going to put up a $163-1 every week, but it's nice to really have it validated that he's somebody that we want to have. All right, last thing, and I know this is we're going on a little while here, but there's always so much to talk about on Sunday, and I could probably go much longer. But last one, Brett Favre, 3 straight bad games, and there may be a temptation here to really overreact to the bad games. And 3 touchdowns against 7 interceptions over the last 3 starts, and that's not good. He's gone negative in a few leagues, and he leads the NFL in interceptions. I mean, if you're in a league that subtracts for interceptions, you knew what you were getting into with Brett Favre. He's got the most interceptions in the history of the NFL, but it's been especially bad this year. I'm a firm believer that Brett Favre's always been a streaky quarterback, that he's capable of going from brilliance to looking terrible to looking brilliant again on a game-by-game or even drive-by-drive basis. So you kind of just have to stick it out with him, and more likely than not, he will bounce back to form, and especially once his receivers get healthy, because both of his starters were hobbled this past Sunday. So, all right. There you go. Thanks for sticking it out through a very long Charch chat here at Open Sports. If you want to send in your fantasy questions, please do so. fantasy@opensports.com is the email address. fantasy@opensports.com. Thanks. We'll be back tomorrow.
So you think you can tackle a pro? There's only one way to find out. Click on fantasy@opensports.com.